Knights of the Scimitar is the 8th episode of the 5th season of Cheers. This is, of course, directed by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode. And I have quite a lot of notes with this one, so bear with me. There's a lot to talk about. I will go through what happens and share some thoughts. It starts off in quite a fun way. We actually get a Cliff-themed intro where a US postal worker called Walt Twitchell, played by Raye Burk, comes in, and there's a bit of teasing between Cliff and Twitchell. And Cliff makes the joke that he's the man who puts the knee in weenie, which to Cliff made perfect sense. And Twitchell says that he's actually going to report Cliff for wearing his postal keychain while on active duty. I have no idea if that's a thing or not. And Cliff actually pulls out this little, I don't know what they're called, but those little kind of pocket telescopes that you look through, like you get those like kaleidoscope ones, and there's supposed to be a saucy picture on the inside. And I knew exactly what was going to happen, and the reason I knew this is because this has happened to me. Twitchell looks into it and it leaves a black smudge on his face. My friend had a magic set or a box of tricks, and in it was one of those things you look through that leaves a black smudge on your eye. So I could see that coming. What I think is not predictable is that Twitchell actually manages to make Cliff look through it and give Cliff a black eye as well. So a very fun way to start things off. We then get probably the main narrative established, and this is the story with Sam and Diane. Interestingly, the title of the episode, and the titles don't always refer to the main part of the episode, but the title refers to what I consider to be basically just more than padding. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But first of all, Sam tells Diane it sounds like she's developing a slow leak, and this is because Diane is sighing and making all kinds of noises, and she tells Sam that she's been doing some teaching on the side and a student has grown fond of her, and part of her is tempted to date him even though she thinks it wouldn't be acceptable. This is a character with the brilliant name Lance Apollonaire, and Sam is convinced that Diane has made this person up, but we'll come back to that in a moment. We now go to the part that's referred to in the title, and this is because Cliff has become a member of the Knights of the Scimitar, and he's really excited about this. He's going to get other people involved in this, and he says whoever says the number closest to the number he's thinking of from 1 to 10 will be the person that he first gets introduced to the Knights of the Scimitar. And Norm starts off with 2,012,012, and the others just go one above them, so Norm is clearly still the closest. And despite that tactic, Norm is the chosen one, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. We then go back to Sam and Diane. There are a lot of interactions between Sam and Diane here. They're all beautifully written, brilliantly done. And despite the fact that I'd seen this episode before, of course, I couldn't remember what Diane did. And she did something, and for about 10 seconds until she explained it, I was genuinely thinking, what on earth are you doing? Sam hands her some money, a paper note, to ask her to get change upstairs at Melville's. And she has her back to Sam and leans back with the money in the air and kind of pushes it into his head. And I was so baffled by what on earth she was doing. And then she said, Lance is definitely taller than you are. Of course, she's trying to rub Sam up the wrong way, making him jealous of Lance. And Sam, once Diane goes up to Melville's, Sam actually asks Carla who the most handsome person is that she knows. And she starts to say famous people, and she says her butcher when Sam insists that she names somebody she knows in real life. And clearly Sam is having these insecurities, and of course he wouldn't let Diane see that, but he is clearly bothered, and we see a little bit of this later on when Frasier comes into it as well. But before that, Cliff comes in and he asks Norm why he wasn't at his interview with the Knights of the Scimitar, and I actually thought it seemed like Norm hadn't been. And it turns out actually he had been, and they phoned him at Cheers. I love the fact that Norm spends so much time at Cheers that that's the number that they were able to reach him on. I think that's brilliant. And they accepted him. He is now a knight. Then Frasier comes in and he says to Sam, how are you doing, Sam, old man? And Sam actually says, don't call me that. I don't obviously want to be called old. And here we see Sam's insecurities further. And this is something I've touched upon over the last few episode discussions, but we're really at a point now where Sam as a character has reached a turning point. Certainly in the first few seasons, maybe a little bit of season 4, he was starting to change as a person, he was starting to grow and mature, and maybe mature is not the right word I should use here given his insecurities, but more than ever, we are seeing this now, and I'd say most of this is because of how Diane has affected him. And Sam actually says, and I quote, "Diane's made up some guy who's supposed to be great looking, but it just gets me riled." And honestly, this got me riled because after that he said, and I quote, "I could care less about the whole thing," which on the one hand really riled me because it's I couldn't care less, but at the same time, maybe we could say it's a slip of the tongue because actually he's correct. He could care less about the situation. However, he then immediately after said, "I could give a rat's rear about what Diane does." And again, it really, really annoyed me because it's I couldn't give a rat's rear. But again, he isn't wrong. He could give a rat's rear about what Diane does because he does care. And I kind of tried to not get too annoyed by that because while it's 2 significant grammatical errors back to back, I don't know if I should blame Ted Danson, if I should blame the writers, or if I should just brush it under the rug and say, well, actually, he is telling the truth. So I don't know. I shouldn't let it irritate me. But it's not the first time that this has happened in Cheers, but I will move on from that. Sam is actually given some words of advice, some supportive encouragement from Carla. And then that all falls flat because in walks Lance Apollonaire. He is a real person. And I'd love to know what anybody else thinks of this. I can't fully remember the first time I saw this episode how I felt. But watching it now, I feel like it was obvious that this was a real person. I don't think I ever suspected that Lance Apollonaire was a figment of Diane's imagination. But as I said, I don't fully remember how I initially responded to this episode. So if you're watching it now for the first time, what did you think? Did you think Sam was right, or did you believe Lance was real the entire time? And to make matters worse for Sam, he is beautiful. He's played by J. Eddie Peck, and Carla actually faints twice. Sam asks him for ID, and I feel like he did this because partly it gives him power over Lance, but also because he wanted to prove that that's really his name and it's not, I don't know, somebody Diane had hired to play a part or something, because you never know. And what's really interesting about this is that his ID says he is 6'2.5", and Sam remarks that he is 6'3". And actually, I googled it, and many sources on the internet say that Ted Danson is in fact 6'2". So anybody can confirm if that's the case or not. I'd love to know. It really does not matter at all. But if by some miracle Ted Danson is listening to me waffle on about this, please let me know if you're 6'2" or 6'3". But as I said, it doesn't matter. He's brought these flowers. Lance has brought these flowers for Diane to try and convince her to go away with him for the weekend because she's still not agreeing to it. And we have this beautiful moment where Lance leaves Cheers and Diane has the flowers and she's behind the bar with Sam, and she mentioned that she was imagining him picking flowers in his bikini briefs, and Shelley Long just has the most adorable smile on her face and it's just so beautiful, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. We then go to the Knights of the Scimitar meeting, and Norm is having his introduction there, and there's this this brilliant exchange that made me laugh out loud where the person doing the introduction asked Norm if he was married. Norm said yep. The guy said 2, and Norm's response was long. And the comedic timing there was just perfect. Absolutely fantastic. Norm was then about to hand out his business cards for accounting because that's kind of the reason why Cliff managed to persuade him to go in the first place. And then it turns out he's not allowed to do business with fellow members, fellow Knights of the Scimitar. And despite that, he's actually saying to Cliff, they seem like a good bunch of guys. Maybe this is going to be a great thing. And it's so obvious that something bad is about to happen. And I don't think anybody could have predicted what was said next, because Norm, feeling quite positive, he's got his turban on and his sword, and he goes back into the room just as there's an announcement that they've decided to not allow beer, to ban beer at the meetings, and Norm says, without missing a beat, goodbye in the most adorable way. up he gets. That is the end of Norm's journey with the Knights of the Scimitar. The rest of the episode is back at Cheers with Sam and Diane is asked by Sam, what do you see in Lance? And she actually gave Sam a chance to tell her to not go away with him for the weekend, and he said 4 really cold words. Lance came into Cheers and asked Diane, have you made a decision? Referring to going away with him. And Diane turns to Sam and asks, have I, Sam? And Sam's response, send me a postcard. Diane was clearly looking for Sam to say, no, stay, I love you. And he said, send me a postcard. And those 4 words are just so cold. And Diane's fed up. She talks to Sam privately. She says to him, and I thought this was really brilliant. It's a quote that I wrote down as well. And she said, how long can you drag this out? You're hurting me, but you're also hurting yourself with this feigned indifference. And she has just beautifully summed up the last 7 or 8 episodes since we had the proposal incident. And I think that just beautifully sums up everything. And she tells him another great quote. The quote itself isn't that funny. It's not going to sound funny when I say it, but Shelley Long's delivery was fabulous. And she said, I'm going to kiss him in front of you in the whole bar and it's going to kill you. And just the delivery was fabulous. They're both behaving like children. Out she goes. She kisses Lance and they're about to leave. And Sam says to Diane, it would have bothered me if you had done this. And they have this most beautiful kiss. And honestly, I feel like the audience didn't react to that in a way that I was expecting. I don't think the reaction was as powerful as it would have been for me. I think, as I said, I don't fully remember how I felt with this episode, but even watching it now, knowing it was coming, it still felt incredible, like everything they'd been building towards finally was starting to happen. And there's this beautiful moment where Diane tells Lance that actually she needs to work that weekend, she can't go away with him. Lance might not be the smartest person for reading the situation, and Sam has just gone back into his office with a smile on his face, and Diane looks back in his wake with a look of longing, and there's just this great desperation that comes with this for it to work out. I felt the same way with the proposal. This was it. They're going to be together happily forever. Perfect. It didn't work out. Now, 7 episodes later, it's the same feeling. Finally, they're not behaving like children anymore. Let's get on with the show. And of course, I won't say what happens next. I do know what's in store and what's around the corner. But certainly that moment was, I think, a relief more than anything else. And we end on a bit of comedy with Carla pouncing on Lance, and it's not a bad way to end the episode. It definitely feels like not so much a cliffhanger, but I'm desperate to rewatch the next episode because I want to see things unfolding. I want to find out how Sam and Diane respond. Does this mean they're back together now, or is this still going to be a bit of a grey area? I won't answer any of those questions, but I do feel like there were enough questions in this that while it wasn't a proper cliffhanger, I do feel like there is that desperation. Certainly I feel the desperation to watch the next episode. So it is beautiful. It's a great episode. There was a lot to cover there. A lot of really brilliant things. Really great quotes. Wonderful performances. It might not be the funniest, actually. There were some funny moments, of course. But in terms of laugh out loud funny, which a lot of Cheers episodes are for me, it might not have been quite as funny as some. But nevertheless, I adored it. Knights of the Scimitar is a really fabulous episode.